Fagella here with CLV Boost, and in this CLV Boost tutorial we're going to be diving into the topic of email subject lines. So to quickly review what we're going to be covering in this short video training, we're initially going to be delving into the importance of the subject line in general and sort of its ability to leverage your open rates and to ultimately leverage your email results in terms of your bottom line for the business. We're going to talk about the relevance of email subject lines from a marketer's perspective, which is a good place to start. Some of the red flags that I'll put you in the spam box. There's a few little nuances and details here that few people know about. And many people aren't even aware that there are automatic algorithms that are sorting spam and tucking things away in folders, not just from where it's sent from, but what the subject line actually says, in addition to body copy and things like that. So we'll talk about some of the big red flags you want to make sure you avoid. We'll talk about length of subject lines, always a common topic. You know, how many words, how many characters, what is best, what's a best practice here. Then we're going to get into a few other common errors to avoid. Very frequently made mistakes that may very well exist in your normal broadcast or your normal automated email marketing, as well as principles to stick to. So without further ado, let's move right along. Email subject lines. First and foremost, the subject line of your email messaging determines its likelihood to be opened and determines its likelihood to be put in spam. So because your messages must be opened for your marketing to be profitable, a honed subject line skill will ensure more eyeballs on your offers and your content, building better relations and yielding more revenue. So there's sort of a twofold methodology here. Are two factors that are put in play, both your open rate and your deliverability being put in spam or not, that get influenced by your subject line. It's important to at least understand the basics to make sure we can up those numbers. So if you can improve your major email communication channels to have even a slightly higher open rate, the results to the bottom line can be massive. And this is a very easy example, okay? So we're taking an example of two different emails, one with slightly worse subject lines, one with slightly better subject lines. So the first here, we have a 5-email sequence with an average of a 20% open rate. If that's sent to, let's say, 1,000 people, then if we have 5 emails going to 1,000 people with a 20% open rate, the math is very easy. We're going to see 1,000 opened emails. If our click-through rate is 25%, that means 25% of the people who open end up clicking the link, then we're going to have 250 visits to our website, 250 people leaving that email and following right along to the link that we send them on. Now, if we have a 5% purchase or appointment rate, so if you're a CPA, maybe you're looking to set appointments with a bunch of prospects. If you are selling a product on e-commerce, like a baby crib or a car or whatever it might, whatever people are selling on e-commerce, then we might be looking at a particular e-com sale. So people are either getting out the credit card or they're getting themselves in for an appointment, either or. If the numbers look as such, we have 250 people hitting the site, we have 5% purchase or appointment rate. Just to make the numbers easy, we got 12 sales or appointments that end up yielding from that particular message. Now, if we have the same 5-email sequence, so same copy in the email, same text inside the email, but we make our subject lines attuned to best practices. We refine our subject lines, and we get our average open rate to a 33% open rate, which is actually not impossible. We're talking about a 5-email sequence, even to existing segments of your list. And now if that's sent to 1,000 folks, instead of getting 100 opened emails, we end up with 1,665 opened emails. Now, if we have the same click-through rate of 25%, then that's going to give us 416 visits to the site. If we keep the same numbers here and we have a 5% purchase or appointment rate, just to make the numbers easy, that ends up giving us 20 sales or appointments. So we're looking at almost double the yield from a very small tweak or adjustment, 13–12% of our open rates going up. Now that's a very, very big leverage point that is often overlooked. People think about how long the email sequence should be. They focus a lot on sales page conversion, a lot of other factors. Subject line is one of the initial potential barriers and bottlenecks to keep your message from being in front of more eyeballs. So mastering this skill is tremendously relevant. And if you have a main core sequence of your business, then all of a sudden your numbers can go from this 12 to this 20 for every 1,000 people that go through. The end of that 12-month period ends up looking very, very nice in terms of how many more sales you end up getting. So this is a very important skill to be able to master. So from a marketing perspective, we're going to think about email in terms of relevance. So thinking like a marketer implies delivering messages to your prospects that make them think, this is for me. You really want to have that kind of emotional sense and feeling when someone reads a message. They don't want to feel like this is a blanket, boring, vanilla message. They want something that's going to resonate with them, relate to them. So this means segmentation is important because different groups will respond differently to different subject lines. So if you have a business that sells to different industries, you might say something about green tech, or say something about med tech, or say something about the healthcare sector in your subject line in the beginning or towards the end or what have you, and that might help to, or that almost invariably will help increase open rates so long as you're not using that same strategy in every single email you send to those segments. But if you send out a segmented email to the green tech folks calling them out, generally we're going to see higher relevance. We're going to get up the "this is for me" factor, and we'll get more eyeballs in that email. We might segment by their goal. So if we happen to know why someone's come to our website, if they've selected from a drop-down, what are you looking to get out of our service? And let's say that we are some kind of an auto repair shop or something like that, and their goal is to have a consistent place for their monthly checkups of their fancy car. Their goal is to be able to purchase the finest equipment for their engines and for the cleaning of the inside of their car. Maybe they just want the service level, buffing, waxing, detailing kind of stuff. Either way, whatever it is that they're looking for, whatever the goal is for the kind of yield that they want to bring forth from their vehicle by bringing it to you, we can sort of segment by that in the first place. Or we can go by lead source. We might have a bunch of folks that found us by registering for a webinar that we put on, and if we call out, "Hey, webinar registrants," as the first 3 words of our email, oftentimes, especially if that webinar was in the last 2 weeks or so, we're going to see tremendous open rates compared to a generic or vanilla messaging. So that's an important thing to sort of point out there as well. So another example here, if we have spring discount, current customers only, this is more likely to be opened by current customers than a generic message like spring discount special, for example. So relevance and flagging per whatever list segment you're sending to, or per the situation, per the season, per whatever state they're in, etc. This definitely helps with open rate and ties in with the general marketing tenet of making sure that they feel like this is for me. Bear that in mind as you're writing subject lines. Here's some spam red flags you want to make sure you avoid. Number 1 is having caps locked. So if you have a lot of all caps text, okay? If you have more than 1 word in all caps, even 1 word sometimes can be sketchy. Sometimes they look like abbreviations and the filters aren't going to pick them up. Sometimes they do. If you have any more than 3 letters in a row for an abbreviation of something in all caps, generally speaking, you're riding the line. Does that mean you should never do it? No, not necessarily. Maybe occasionally the surprise factor is worthwhile to have a couple more emails picked up by the spam filter from time to time. But in general, having caps locked is a negative factor and is much more likely to get you thrown into spam. In addition, funky caps or symbols. So you see how I've got all my capitalization messed up on that sentence there, and I'm throwing in symbols in weird, funky orders where they might not normally belong in day-to-day grammatical context. In this kind of a situation, the spam filters are very likely to pick this up and kick it the heck out of the inbox because it just looks like spam. So if you have symbols in an order, whether you did it intentionally or not, you have an and sign with a dash after it, you have a quotation, and then you have a slash or a caret symbol, as you see I have at the beginning of this sentence. All of those various factors, even if it looks funky and it wasn't intentionally done to order your symbols in a strange order or order your caps in a strange order, often the filters are going to pick that up and they're going to want to boot you. So you want to generally avoid that as much as possible. In addition, words like free, only, or 100%. There's so many different websites where you can Google spam flag words, words that'll put me in the spam box. If you type that into Google, you'll get oodles, but there's a lot of overlap on these particular terms, okay? Free is more or less known across the board. Generally speaking, free is, it's one of those words that's most likely to get you booted into the spam filter. Ought you never use it? Not necessarily, but it should be very sparingly, if at all. And again, only and 100%. And in general here, any percentage or use of a $sign, for example, $20 coupon for you, those sorts of usage of the percentage symbol or the dollar symbol are slightly more likely to end up getting you booted. The $sign, generally speaking, you'll see more red flags for, at least from our homework here. And also any use of the exclamation point. Is that to say you should never exclaim in a subject line? No, not necessarily, but by golly, it should not be often. And you should know that just by putting an exclamation point at the end of a sentence in your subject line, you're much more likely to end up in the spam filter. So none of these factors are guaranteed to get you in the spam bucket there, but in general, they increase your percentage of landing there. So just bear that in mind and aim to stay away from those, especially if they're being overused or used in contexts where you really don't need them. Let's talk about some general best practices for the length of subject line. So, though there are no exact number of characters or words that's best, I really wish it was that easy. Make sure every email is 72 characters and you'll get the best open rate. It really doesn't work like that. In general, the best practice is to stay under 10 words and under 140 characters in length in general. Short 1 to 4 word subject lines are best used sparingly for best effect and don't seem to usually perform in terms of open rates as a default length. So if all of your emails are check this out or new deal inside, whatever the case may be, very, very short, very, very choppy, generally as a de facto go-to for subject lines, that is usually not most conducive for opens. So common errors to avoid. Using the same subject line repeatedly. I see this happen all the time. People that run a monthly event or they do something quarterly, they'll call the email the same thing. If the event is called the Business Boot Camp, they'll be like, business boot camp update, blah, blah, then they say the location of it this month or whatever. And then the next month is Business Boot Camp update, blah, blah, and they say the same thing again. Is there some value to the consistency? Yes. If you're sending it out on about the same date and people know that that is the Business Bootcamp email, could you use something other than that same word over and over? Yes, you certainly could and keep up your professionalism. And generally, your open rates will thank you for it. You want people to see, you want eyeballs on your emails, you want eyeballs on your links. And if you're titling things the same thing over and over, especially in a regimented basis, such as monthly, quarterly, some people do this even weekly, which is all the worse, then you'll see your open rates drop and tank much more consistently than if you're varying up your email subject lines in general. So in addition, for errors to avoid here, irrelevant initial emails. So I've seen a lot of folks that'll pull this off incorrectly, particularly in e-commerce and in internet marketing, but even in sort of more professional B2B context, it's occasionally not done correctly. Best practice here is to make sure that your first email gets opened and give yourself the absolute best likelihood thereof. If someone misses your first email, there's a really good chance they're going to miss the second. And if you end up in spam or if they just ignore you and they don't know who you are, then when that second one comes, it's a little bit more off kilter and you've sort of gotten them off of the tracks. So the idea is this: when you first interact with someone, when you first acquire an email address, whether it's through a purchase or through an opt-in, usually the best practice is to include the name of your business or the name of the free thing they got or the name of the website they were on that blatantly welcomes them and flags them that this is where they came from. So, if the Smith store is a place where you can buy blacksmith supplies, for example, and somebody subscribes to their newsletter online and talks about, their goals for blacksmithing or what have you, and maybe they live in that same town, a proper initial subject line would be something along the lines of, a welcome from the Smith store. Nobody has any question of who that's from. Generally speaking, that's A, at least going to acknowledge the connection. Okay, they got my email address. But B, you're pretty darn likely to get it open, especially because they were just on your website. This is not something they did 3 months ago and now you're just reaching back out to them. They just hopped in, they just bought or they just opted in. So flagging it for your business, making relevance king for that initial email is generally best practice, and irrelevance is often what people do. Something along the lines of, new coupon code for new customers. That's the first email I get from an e-commerce site. I might not even know that it's them. I might think to myself, who's sending me discount codes? What is this all about? Is that the company I bought from? Is that somebody else? It needs to be blatantly obvious. And in general, we do not want to have irrelevant initial emails. Things need to be more obvious for our initial prospects and customers. Other shorter errors to avoid here, using the first name in the subject line for every email for prospect or customer. So if even every or every other email, you're saying, hey, Stephanie, you should, this is for you, Stephanie. The second time that's used in a row, the relevance is already blown out the window. We're going to talk about best practices and how, if there are any tactics or tricks like shorter subject lines, first names being used, etc., we want to use them sparingly. Anything that's too repetitive here, we talked about repetitiveness in terms of the title of the subject line, but if we're using the name anywhere in the subject line repetitively, again, we're putting people to sleep, we're turning them off, we're making things seem vanilla. And we do not want to do that if we want to get open rates up high. Next up, Excessive use of caps, symbols, or potentially confusing combinations thereof. We had talked about this before, but generally speaking, in almost any business where we've got a lot of autoresponders written or we have regular broadcasts going out, I can almost always dig into the back of the system and find 1, 2, 3 emails where we're getting a ton of emails dumped in the spam box when we did not need it. So simply going back, combing out those emails with excessive caps, symbols, or potentially confusing combinations thereof is more than a best practice, and it's certainly an error to avoid when you're writing in the first place. So some principles to stick to as we start wrapping up here. First and foremost, any tactic, such as using short subject lines or the first name in the subject lines, needs to be used sparingly for best results. If I'm going to use someone's first name, I might do it once a month, once every 2 months, because that email is now going to sort of grab their attention. They're not used for me saying Stephanie, Stephanie, Stephanie every time I send them an email. I want to use those sparingly. Same thing with a shorter subject line. If I use every now and again, you'll see a subject line like bad news, ... get an open rate that's astronomical, right? But if you use a 2-word subject line for 3 emails in a row, that third email, nobody's even going to open. Generally, you're putting them right back to sleep. So if you have any tactic, anything that seems to work well, generally we want to spice that into a rotation. We do not want to hammer it too hard or hammer it home. In addition, drafting 3 to 4 subject lines for important marketing messages before deciding on the one that will be sent is a best practice to stick with as well, because the implications for your business can be rather large. So if you're writing an automated sequence for new customers that's 5 emails long, please take the time to think up 3 to 4 subject lines per message and think through which one is going to hit the hardest, which one seems to be most in alignment with these best practices, is most relevant. And if we're going to begin testing, let us begin testing with some options so we can think about what the ideals are instead of just sort of shooting off the hip, which is how 99% of email subject lines are written. We certainly want to be different if we want better results. In general here, stick to the 6 to 10 word range for the length of most messaging, and we had talked to most subject lines, and we had talked about staying under 140 characters, really at all costs when it's possible here. In addition, flag various list segments with emails that call out to them. So if you have folks in every state, you might say something like, Californians, tax advice you need, if you're a tax advisory or what have you. If someone is a past customer, we might flag them. Past customer, here's how much we miss you. Again, notice these are all staying within that general range of email length of the 6 to 10 words, and we're also flagging. Now, if you flag for every email, do you think that's going to help? No, again, we're going to put folks to sleep again, but in general, these are some good best practices for when we do segment. Again, if we're segmenting and being too repetitive, it's not a good thing, but in terms of best practices, these are great ones to stick with, and generally, they're going to pull a lot more opens than what people are using if they're not trained in subject lines. Just simply replacing these best practices, going through the common errors, should be able to bump general open rate by 8, 10, 18% sometimes, especially when we're looking at longer sequences. And the ramifications there, of course, are pretty darn big. So moving along, bear in mind, subject lines are just one of many of the tools that you have at your disposal to turn email marketing into a moneymaker for your business. If you have any other questions, you can always feel free to reach out to us. In addition to doing full-blown assessments of businesses and working on an advisory and implementation level, we also do a lot of individual project work. And sometimes this has to do with email sequence assessment, or the actual copywriting of important email sequences that a business wants to get right. They don't want to guess. They don't want to go on Google and YouTube to find the best practices. They want to plug in something and have some experts there to really test it and refine it, make sure it's driving revenue, and oftentimes that's when we're brought in. So if you have projects and you'd like to be in touch with us, certainly reach out at www.clvboost.com/strategy. And otherwise, thank you for being here with us on this training on subject lines from CLV Boost.